The linear actuator, which is more commonly called the cylinder or ram, can be disassembled while the arm is still fully assembled. First, support the arm at the elbow joint. Then, lock out the compensator. Before performing any work on the arm, make sure the compensation pressure has been relieved or that the compensator being used for the arm has been isolated. Failure to do so can result in the sudden, unexpected loss of fluid. Also, be sure to lock out and tag out vehicle hydraulics and power. Cut and remove the tie wraps that hold the shoulder actuator rod protector to the azimuth clevis shear pin so the protector can move freely. Next, remove the shoulder actuator pivot pin by using an 1 1/8" socket to loosen the pivot pin bolts. The pivot pin will rotate while the bolts are turned, so use an 1 1/4" wrench to hold the flat section of the pin while the bolts are loosened. Unthread the bolts and lower the actuator away from the upper arm. Then remove the pivot pin and the spacer from the actuator. Disconnect the 2 hydraulic hoses from the actuator using a 9/16 wrench. Oil may flow out as the pressure is released. Cap both the hoses and the fittings on the actuator. The actuator can now be gently lowered away from the upper arm. Remove the clevis shear pin holding the actuator to the azimuth by using 2 1/4" Allen sockets to loosen the screws that thread through the pin. One end of the pin will come off, and then the remainder of the pin can be pushed out of the hole and removed. The rod protector can slide off, and the linear actuator is now free to move to a workbench for disassembly. First, remove the caps from the hydraulic fittings and fully exercise the actuator over a receptacle to discharge as much excess oil as possible. Now secure the actuator in a vise vertically, holding it on the fixed housing end with the actuator rod end facing up. A special socket is used that will slide over the rod end and grab the nose nut. Unthread the nose nut and pull the actuator rod completely out of the housing. Now, to disassemble the actuator rod, place it in the vise vertically, holding it on the rod end. On the end of the piston, there's a cutout that fits a 1/2" socket drive. As you turn the drive, either the piston or the rod end will unthread. If necessary, heating the piston and rod end with a heat gun will help to soften the Loctite and ease disassembly. Continue to turn the drive until either end is loose and the assembly comes apart. Now, slide the nose nut off the actuator rod. In order to remove the rod end from the rod must be secured horizontally in a vise with special soft jaws. Then use the same special socket that was used before on the rod end to unthread it from the rod. On the piston, there are 2 bearings that are slit so they can easily be removed. This piston also has a seal that is made up of 3 different components. There is a center elastomer with squared edges called a quad ring that can be removed. It sits in the groove over a harder plastic seal that is removed destructively by carefully cutting across it diagonally with a razor blade. Under the seal is a square ring that can also be removed. On the nose nut, there's an O-ring around the outside that can be removed. Inside the nose nut, there is a bearing, a seal, another bearing, another seal, and a scraper. The bearings, like those on the piston, are slit and can be easily removed. The seals and scraper are removed destructively using a dental-type pick to lift them out. Then lift out the O-rings that sit beneath each. The linear actuator has now been completely disassembled.